Hi, brothers. I had hoped to be able to do this with you live at our normal time, but I needed to go out of town for a day, and unfortunately, I was busy at the very time that we normally have the class. So I don't like to do it this way, but I at least wanted to, I didn't want to have us lose any more progress in working through the assignments together. And so I wanted to record this session with you, but hopefully, Lord willing, the rest of the sessions we will have live. And before we get to the session, I would like to look at our schedule in the coming weeks. Today being the 23rd of February, make sure, yeah, 23rd. And we are today going to be looking at word studies. The next week, Brother Jim will be working with you on the next assignment. And then 2 weeks after that, Jim will also be working with you on the following assignments for those next 2 weeks, March 14th and 21st. We'll have a week off, and then we'll have 3 weeks in April that we'll be meeting together. I'll lead those meetings looking at the sermon itself, the sermon delivery, the manuscript. So that's the plan. And then that'll basically give you a couple of weeks until our class begins in person in May. So we'll look at more details when it gets closer to that. But just to give you an idea. So basically, we will be meeting every week from here until April 19th, except for March 7th and March 28th. Those 2 weeks we won't be meeting. All right. And we'll be covering everything needed for all the assignments for the class, the exegetical assignments, the homiletical assignments as well. Okay. So this is to prepare you in working through the assignments for your two passages. All right. So today, I want to focus attention on word studies. All right. Word studies are a common step that I think we're familiar with, but I want to talk to you a little bit about that, review a couple of things, and just remind you that these steps that we've been looking at for studying an epistle, we've done several of them already, all the way up through last week. We went through textual observations, and that was assignment 1.16. This week, our focus will be studying significant words of the passage, how to do that, and that will cover assignment 1.17. So we'll be looking at 1.17, which is our word studies assignment that we'll be talking about today. So with that, let's give attention now to word studies. All right, remember again, word studies are fairly familiar. It's again it's when we study a particular word, but from the original language. So when we do word studies, if you're using an English translation, it helps to know what the meaning of the English word is. So it's fine to look that up, see, but ultimately the word study needs to be from the word in its original language. So if you're in the New Testament, you'll be looking up that word in Greek. If you're in the Old Testament, you'll be looking that word up in Hebrew, or in some chapters in Daniel and Ezra, it's Aramaic. All right, so you want to look the word up in the original language and do a word study from the word in the original language, not in the translated language. All right, that's important to keep in mind. And so with that, as we look at significant words of the passage, there's one key principle. If you go to your syllabus, you can look up in more detail some elements. We're not going to cover everything that we covered in class, but there's one very important principle that you must have understood. You must understand clearly when doing a word study. There's two aspects to the meaning of a word. All right, we have what's called the lexical analysis. That is the dictionary definitions of the word, right? So in every language, every word has a definition, a meaning, and most words have more than one meaning. And so you would go to a lexicon or a dictionary and look up that word in its original language. So for example, if you were looking up the word for sanctification, in English, sanctification would have a particular meaning. If you're looking up a more general word, word like transport. That can have more than one meaning. It can have the verbal idea to transport, to move something, to carry something, or it can have the idea of a noun, a transport, something that moves things. All right. Or to transport yourself, to move yourself from one place to another. So words can have different meanings, as we know, right? Every language, that's the case. So the key is to understand that, yes, a word has its lexical definition, its lexical meanings, its definitions. But then also there's the idea of, well, what does the word mean in its context? It's the relation of the words to each other. So the particular word you are looking at, what does that word mean with the related to the other words around it? All right. So ultimately, and this is the key principle, it is the context which determines the meaning of a word. It is the words around it that determines the meaning of a word. Again, a lexicon tells us the way a word is used in a given language, but it doesn't tell us how it is being used in a particular statement, right? That is what the context will tell us. So if I were to say something like, it was hot. Now you might think that immediately the idea of, oh, it's warm, that I was talking about the temperature. But it could also mean, in English, sometimes the word hot has been used in a colloquial way, in a figurative way, to say that something really neat or something fun or exciting. And so you won't know what meaning that I'm using the word in until you have context. If I were to say I went down to the beach and the sun was out, it was hot. Okay, I'm using the idea of temperature. But if I said something like, we went to my friend's birthday party and it was hot, well, it could mean temperature, or it could mean we had a fun time. Now, if I said it went to my friend's party, it was really exciting and fun, it was a hot time. Okay, so then we get more clarity as to the meaning. So it's important we ultimately, a dictionary will tell us the different ways that a word is defined. It'll tell us the different possible meanings, possible definitions. But ultimately, which definition fits the word in that passage will be determined by the context, the words around it. Okay? So that's a key principle that we need to keep in mind. And that's exactly why we wait until this step, late in the process of study, to do the word study. Again, looking at our steps here, notice we've already done read and observe the book, background context of the book, the contextual flow, the block diagram of the passage. We made textual observations, and then we do the significant word studies. All right. So we intentionally wait till later in the process because we want to know what the context is. What is the background? What is the author's flow of thought? What does the diagram look like? The observations from the text. Those will give us a clue or an understanding of the context, so that when we see a word in its context, we can understand the meaning of the passage. All right, for a good example, let me just show you. I think we covered this one in class, but is, let's say, for example, 1 John chapter 4, right, where he says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. All right, so this passage, what does he mean by that? Perfect love casts out fear. Is that talking about any fear? Is it talking about my love for something, the emotion of love? What does he mean? Well, we figure out what he means by looking at the whole context. He starts out, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, because God is love. By this, the love of God is manifested in us. And this is love, not that we love God, but he loved us. If God so loved us, so notice here the focus of the love is God's love for us. We get to verse 16. We've come to know and believe the love which God has in us. God is love. And the one who abides in love abides in God. So notice it's focusing on God's love, and in response to that, our need to love. By this, love has been perfected with us. What love? God's love, his love in us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment. Because as he is, so also are we in the world. There is no fear in love. What kind of fear is he talking about? Perfect love casts out fear. Keep reading, because fear involves punishment. And the one who fears is not perfected in love. Oh, okay, now we have more clarity. By looking at the words around it, we see that this idea of love casts out fear, God's love in the context, casts out fear of judgment. Okay? He talks about judgment in verse 17. He talks about what love is all the way from verse 7, the focus on God's love. So when he says there's no fear in love, he's saying there's no fear of judgment in love, that as I know God loves me, I do not need to fear his punishment, because his love, his perfect, complete love, casts out that fear. I know God loves me because he has sent his son to die for me, and he is love. That's what John has been saying. And so knowing his love, there's no fear. There's no fear of punishment if I know that I'm his child. We love, and then here's the application, John says. So knowing that there's no fear in love, that I'm his child, I'm not in punishment, but God is love, and his love abides in me, then I should love. Okay? So perfect love casts out fear. It's not any love. It's not the emotion of love. It's not any fear, but it is speaking of the fear of punishment, and that God's love, his complete love, is for me and in me, casts out fear of punishment, because I know I am his. All right, so we identify and understand the meaning of the words that John uses by understanding the context of the passage. Okay? All right, so that's the key principle. Now, what are the steps? What are the specifics? Again, these are in your notes in the syllabus. I don't recall the page number right now explicitly, but you can look it up in your syllabus. And here are some of the ways to identify significant words in your passage. You know, as you're thinking about, okay, how do I know what words should I do a word study on? Well, do a word study. You can do a word study on any word you want. Okay, there's no restrictions, there's no rules, but it's important to do a word study on just the significant words, not every word, because then you'll never get anything done if you try to do a word study on every word in your passage. So it's important to choose those words that are significant. Well, how do we identify what words are significant? Well, here are some ideas. Okay, look for words connected to the theme of the passage. Again, if you understand the context, like for example, in 1 John 4, the context there is love. So that's a key word, the word love, being connected to the theme of the passage. That's a key theme in the passage. So I should do a word study on the word love. And if I'm studying specifically 1 John verse 4:18, where it says perfect love casts out fear, I should also do a study on fear. All right. Look for key verbs in the passage, especially in the main sentence. All right. Again, verbs are what drive the action of the passage. They carry a text. So look for the key verbs in the passage. These would be, the verbs often in the independent clauses. And again, you can do every verb if you want, but I would just select a few that are significant. Look for words that are repeated. If an author repeats a word, that means there's emphasis there. He's focusing on that. So if you see, like, in 1 John 4, he repeats the word love many, many times. He also repeats the word abide. So those would be a couple of words that are repeated that you would want to study in the text. Again, I already mentioned this. Look for words that are connected to the theme of the passage. So I repeated that idea. Look for words that just don't make sense. They're unclear to you. They're puzzling. You don't know what they mean. Again, that could be, the English word itself may have trouble identifying the meaning. But if it's not clear what the word means, then do a word study on that. All right. Look for words that are translated differently in the English translations, if you're using those. All right? Because if the translators have a different translations for the same word, that could be a clue, an important word to consider. I'll look for words that have theological significance. So again, in the text in 1 John 4, fear would be an important word. Theologically, what fear is he talking about? Love, of course, again. And then he used that idea of perfect love. So maybe that word perfect. So these would be ones that theologically would be important in that text. And finally, look for words that you think might be unclear to your hearers. All right, words that maybe you would understand the meaning, but as you think about your audience, your hearers, your congregation, think look up the words that you think might not be clear to them. Okay, again, that could be from the English translation, but ultimately you're wanting to look at the original, the Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic word, and study that word in particular. Okay, so these are, I think, 7 ways to identify significant words in your passage. And normally for me, if I'm looking at a text of say, 4 or 5 verses, I think a good rule of thumb might be one word for every verse. So not necessarily one word in each verse, but if I'm studying 5 verses, I might do a word study on 5 words. Again, there's no rule. That's just in my experience over many years in preparing messages. That's about what I think I would do. I don't do a lot of word studies because, again, the context really drives the meaning of the word. But I'll typically look up several. Again, maybe on average 1 word for each verse. So if I'm studying 5 verses, maybe 5 words. If I'm studying 10 verses, maybe 10 words. But again, that can vary. Sometimes you may have a list. Like if you're in 1 Timothy 3, looking at the qualifications of an elder, and you have a list of a bunch of words, you might want to be looking up each of those words to understand them better in that list. But other passages, you may only look up 2 or 3 words because most of the passage seems to make sense. All right. So but just as a general idea, if I'm studying 5 verses, I'll look up probably 4 or 5, 6 words, something like that. Okay. Well, at this point, normally I'd ask, are there any questions? But since this is being recorded, you'll have to type out your question and send it to me by Facebook Messenger. You can email me. So after you identify the significant words in your passage, next you want to find the lexical definition for the word in its original language. Now, what's an easier way to do that? Well, there's a few things. You can use online resources such as Bible Hub or Blue Letter Bible, or you can use the Discovery Bible app. That's a helpful resource to do this. But I'm going to use, I'm just going to do the online, go to Bible Hub. So let's look up. All right, go to Bible Hub. So let's identify that one. I think it would be, let's do it here. Okay. All right, Bible Hub. All right, so let's, this is where I would encourage you to go look up the word, and then we'll look up, we'll be doing a word study. I think I have an example from 2 Timothy. So we'll go to 2 Timothy, then hit interlin, again, right here for the interlinear. All right, so you're going to want to hit that, and it's going to take you to interlinear, and then we're going to click for the chapter. All right, so now this is 2 Timothy 1. And again, if you take note, the interlinear, the middle, the largest black font, that's the actual Greek text. And then below it in red is the literal meaning for each word. So that's a lexical definition. And it's the one that the interlinear, the guys who published this interlinear, I think this is from openbible.com or Open Bible, I can't remember. But so for example, thelematos. That is, there may be several definitions, but they chose the definition of will based on their understanding. So that's what they put here. That's the lexical definition. And then up top, notice there is a number. I don't know if you can see that clearly here. This is called the Strong's number. W.H. Strong, in the 19th century, he went through the King James Bible and he looked up, did a lexical word study for every word. He collected every word, how many times it was used, he compiled into a concordance. So if you had the word, like, for example, thelematos that we just looked at in 2 Timothy, he would have every use, every verse that word is found in the New Testament. And then he would have all the usages of that particular word in the New Testament, and then he included a dictionary definition. So I'll show you that in a minute. But again, looking at, we find the lexical definition of the word using the online resources, and I'll show you that in an example. Then, thirdly, how is the word translated in the other English translations? Okay, so just look, what are the other English translations? How did they define that particular word? All right, now sometimes if all the English translations translate it the same way, then that is very much the most likely, by far, meaning of the word. Right? Because remember, each of these translations had a team of people working on the translation. It wasn't just one guy, but there might be a primary guy who did the translation, but then a committee would look at the translation, and usually with several people who Greek scholars, if they're looking at a New Testament passage, they would essentially study the text, and then as a committee, they would determine the translation. And so if you have 5 translations, and each of those had at least 3 or 4 or 5 people involved in the process, you're talking about 20 or 25, 30 Greek scholars all agreeing on the same meaning of the word. Then that's probably what the word means. All right. You're not going to find any novel meaning that 30 Greek scholars didn't find. But sometimes you'll have a word that's translated a little differently between the English translations, and that might show you there's some variation in the connotation of the word. That is what it could mean in that particular context. All right, so it's important, it's helpful to look up how the word's translated in the other English translations. Then, fourthly, how is the word used in other passages? And I would suggest look up at least 10 passages. All right, and start with, how is that word used in other parts of the same book you're studying? So if we're looking at 2 Timothy, and you have a particular word you're studying, is that word used elsewhere in 2 Timothy? All right, and so is that word used elsewhere in that particular book? All right, so that's an important thing to consider. And then look at, you want to look up, is that word used by the same author in other books? So first look for word uses in the same book, then look for if the same author has used that word in other books. So again, for example, if we're looking at 2 Timothy, the author is Paul. So if we look up, say it's that word, thelematos, will. So we look up, is that word, does he use thelematos anywhere else in 2 Timothy? And then we go, okay, does Paul use that word anywhere else in his other epistles? Right, so that would be the next thing to look for, because again, authors will typically use words that have a similar or same meaning. Not always, but that's what's more typical. So to know what Paul meant when he used that word thelematos, we would look up if he used it in other epistles, and then look up the uses of the word in other epistles, not by the same author. So did James or Peter, or John use thelematos in any of their epistles? But we look up in the same genre, the genre of epistles. Then we want to look up, is there any other uses of the word elsewhere in the New Testament. Okay? So in the Gospels, in Acts, Revelation, do we see that word? And then finally, are there uses of the word in the rest of the Bible? And again, remember that at least in the case of Greek, there is a Septuagint translation, a Greek translation of the Old Testament. So you can look back even there to see if the word is used. But this is the circles of meaning. Start with the author in the same book, then the same author in different books, and then different books of the same genre, and then different books in that testament, and then the whole Bible, right? So if we're looking at 2 Timothy, we'd start with other words, other times the word's used in 2 Timothy, then look at, are there other times that Paul uses the word, since he wrote 2 Timothy? And then the third level is, are there other uses of the word in other epistles? Then look for other uses of the word in the rest of the New Testament and then the Bible. Okay, but only look up to, say, 10 or 12 passages. All right, so I'll show you what that looks like when we get to the example. And then see if you can examine other outside resources for additional information. For example, the Vine's Dictionary of the Greek New Testament is a helpful resource. You may find some online. Sometimes you can get from the TDNT, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, or the Old Testament. The Theological Word Book of the Old Testament is one that often appears, or the Strong's Concordant. Sorry, not Strong's. What's the other lexicon? There's several other lexicons that escape my mind. Well, I'll show you a couple in a minute. And then finally, and this is most important, summarize the meaning of the word in the context of the passage in your own words. Many times when guys do word studies, I don't know why they skip this step. They put all the other information. They'll have all the the lexical definitions. They'll include the different verses the word is used in. They'll look at the different translations and do all the other work, but then they don't put a summary. Well, so okay, so what does the word mean in its context? That's the most important thing. That's what we're trying to find, right? So basically, the key is summarize the meaning of the word in the context of the passage in your own words. All right, so taking all that information, how the author used the word, how the word is used in other passages, the lexical definitions, how the word is translated in English, the other resources, other lexicons. And so taking all that information, and then now, okay, well, what does your word, the word you studied, what does it mean in the context? All right. So that's important, because finally, remember, it is context which gives the meaning of a word. All right. The dictionary gives us the options for how a word is defined, but only the context tells us which of those options is the correct one, which definition fits in that passage. Okay, let's do an example. As I said, 2 Timothy. We'll look at an example from, say, chapter 1, verses 6 to 8. Here, Paul says, "For this reason, I remind you to kindle afresh the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and self-discipline. Therefore, do not be ashamed of either the witness about our Lord or me, his prisoner, but join with me in suffering for the gospel according to the power of God." All right, so let's use this passage. And first we want to go, okay, well, what words seem significant? Well, we might say, well, the word remind seems important because that is a verb, and it's a verb in the key instruction of the text. Right? That's the main sentence. The first independent clause is to remind. I remind you. So we might say, well, what is that word remind? Or what is it that word kindle or kindle afresh? Maybe that word meaning is unclear. Maybe you haven't heard of the word kindle before, and you're thinking Kindle, the the reader, the electronic reader. Well, so no, that's not it. But they didn't have that back then. So what does he mean by kindle or kindle afresh in verse 6? Or you might say, or what about gift? The word gift. That seems to be an important. It's the object of the instruction. So what does gift mean? What is the gift of God? It's again the object of remind, to kindle afresh. All right, so that might be important. Um, then we have a list here, right? In verse 7, God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but power and love. And but now timidity might strike us as, that word seems important. Um, important in the list. It's the reason for the instruction, right? He says, I remind you to kindle afresh. Why? Because God has not given us a spirit of timidity. All right, so this is really a reason for the instruction that Paul gives. How about spirit of timidity? What did he mean by spirit? Is that the Holy Spirit, the human spirit? Is that what's the idea? Spirit can also mean alcohol. So what spirit? What spirit? Holy Spirit, my spirit, or perhaps ashamed of? Again, another verb, key verb, it seems, because he's giving a command here. Don't be ashamed of. So this is a key verb. It's a command. So that might be important. Or again, join with me. Another command. All right, commands are important words. All right, so these would be some different options you might want to consider. Yeah, and again, you could do any word you want here. Those are just ones that stuck out to me. Now, because I want to understand that the main instruction here in the main sentence is I remind you. So I'm gonna go with that word. Let's see what is the meaning of remind in this context. Okay, so that's the word I'm going to choose. So I'm going to go to Bible Hub. So let's hop on over to Bible Hub. Look the word up here. We've got 2 Timothy 1:6. Okay. So for this reason, and here it is. This is the Greek word for remind. And notice here, we see the lexical definition of the interlinear guys. They said it's remind. So that's helpful. So now what I want to do is we want to look up the Strong's number here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is click that number 363. That's the Strong's number, and see what information that I find there. Okay. Let me cut off. All right. So the word here is anamnesco. Anamimnesco. And notice we have the basic definition given here: to remind, to call one's remembrance. Okay. Different ways it's used are mentioned here. The word origin is given here, the NAS translation, and notice here we have the word is used 3, 4, 5, 6 times in the New Testament. And it's translated as remember, remembered, remembers, remind, or reminded. Okay, so it's only used 6 times. And it has the idea of remember or remind. Okay? Definition again, to call to one's remembrance. All right. And then we have, notice, Thayer's Greek lexicon. So here's a Greek dictionary, Thayer's. It's an older one. But we can see here in bold, what are the different definitions of the word? To call to remembrance, to remind, to admonish, to recall to one's mind, to remember, to weigh, to consider. All right. So these are similar in idea and meaning, but these are the different possible meanings. And so these are the things that I would write down or take note of. All right. From Bible Hub, there's a definition. The Strong's number is 363. It occurs 6 times. It's translated in the New American Standard in those different ways. The Thayer's lexicon, these definitions it gives. Strong's definition. Okay, so it's just basic information about the word from the Bible Hub uh, the Bible Hub site. Okay, so that's a basic lexical definitions for the word. Now, how's the word translated in other English translations? So then I would go and look at other translations, and you can do that, by the way, on Bible if you want, or the Discovery Bible app if you have it, or if you have Logos. So here, what I could do is, if I looking up the words, I could go back to. I'll go back to the passage. Here's the Greek text, and then I might look up. Okay, up here in Bible, there's a Bible Hub parallel you can use, which shows different translations. All right, the New International Version, that's verse 6. So I want verse 6. That's verse 1. Verse 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So I go to 2 Timothy 1:6. I hit the Bible here and the Bible Hub parallel. Okay, so that's where I'm at. Again, notice I lost it. But the Bible Hub parallel. Okay, and so now that's where I'm at. So notice the different translations. For this reason, I remind you, New International. This is why I remind you, New Living Translation. For this reason, I remind you, English Standard. The Berean, I remind you, King James, put thee in remembrance. That's an older way to say it. New King James, I remind you. New American Standard, I remind you. Okay. Legacy Standard, I remind you. Okay. So I look all the different translations up, and here we go. This is what the different 8 English translations, some newer, some older. But essentially, it's either remind, or the older way is put you in remembrance, or which means remind. To tell you something that you already knew, or something that's already been said, to say it again, to bring it back to your memory. That's the idea of the English word. So here is pretty straightforward. So remember what I told you before, since these different English translations have come up with the same translation, then that's likely what the word means. Okay, but again, let's see, how is the word used in other passages? Now remember what I mentioned to you, that it's only used 6 times in the New Testament. So one occurrence is in 2 Timothy 1, but here are the rest of the occurrences. So since it's less than 10, I just put them all. So Mark 11, being reminded, Peter said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree. Mark 14, immediately a rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had said the statement to him. 1 Corinthians 4:17, for this reason I sent to you Timothy, who is my beloved and faithful child in the Lord, and who will remind you of my ways in Christ. 2 Corinthians 7:15. So, by the way, 1 Corinthians 4, Paul used the word, right? 2 Timothy was written by Paul. 2 Corinthians 7, and his affection abounds all the more towards you as he remembers the obedience of Hebrews 10. But remember the former days. All right, so all of these are this idea of remembering or recalling to your mind, or having someone remind you or tell you again, bring back to your memory. That's how it's used. Examine other resources. There's a lexicon called the Brown Drivers and Briggs, and Gingrich, I think it is. And it just has to remind someone of something. All right, so again, simple word. And then you might, like I said, sometimes if you want to, okay, well, what does that word remind in English mean? So I looked that up. It's to put in mind of something, to cause to remember. All right. Now, summarize the meaning of the word. So taking all that information that I studied, that I did, looking at other verses, looking at how the other English translations translate the word, looking at the lexical definitions, looking at other resources, I came up with this. In the context, the focus of the word is to recollect or remember or bring something back to mind of what was previously known or understood. The addition of the preposition ana, remember it's anamnesco, emphasize the idea of to recall again. So in 2 Timothy 1:6, Paul uses the word in that way, telling Timothy to remember again to kindle the gift of God in him. This suggests Paul had told him this before and is now reminding him once again. Okay? So I could have summarized it just in a couple of sentences, but this is the idea. This is the meaning of the word in its context. All right? So recall again the 7 steps. And this is what you're going to do for your assignment. Right? Identify the significant words and then identify the particular word you're going to study. Oh, here, actually, let me do this. Let me just go directly to the assignment, which is here, assignment 1.17. Okay? In this assignment, you'll complete step 6 of the exegetical process. And notice here for both of your assigned passages from Colossians. All right? Both of the assigned passages. So again, everybody has been assigned 2 passages from Colossians. For example, let me just show you. If we go to, say we're looking at Pastor Robert here. All right. So he has been assigned 2 passages, Colossians 1, 15 to 17 and Colossians 1, 18 to 20. Again, notice they're all together. It's one paragraph split into 2 texts. So Robert's going to do his word study on both passages, words from both passages. Okay, and here's how I've identified or broken that up. All right, so you're going to do word study on at least 3 words from each assigned passage for a total of 6 word studies. Now, you can do more if you want, but you need to do at least 6. Okay? So do 3 from each assigned passage. So 3 for your first passage, 3 for your second passage. So 6 total. All right? Again, you're doing this word studies from both of your assigned passages in this assignment. So there's going to be 3 words from your first passage and 3 words from your second passage. All right? And here, I gave you, so I remind you of the steps that we just covered together. Identify the significant words in the passage. So you're going to need to identify at least 3 words from each passage. Find the lexical definitions for the word in the original language. Remember, that's where you go to Bible Hub or Bible, blueletterbible.org or Discovery Bible app. All right. Indicate how the word is translated in the other English translations. Then identify how the word is used in other passages. Look up at least 10. And then notice, write those passages down and I highlight, identify how the word's used. Consult other resources. And then finally, summarize the meaning of the word in your own words in the context of the passage. And then I give you an example here. I did one for you today from 2 Timothy 1, but in the assignment, I give you an example from Philemon where I go through each of those steps. So you've got it here, exactly what to do for each step. Just follow this for your passage. All right, and then how the word was used in other epistles. Then I had a couple of resources. And notice, by the way, Vines, there's a web address for Vines. That's a good one to look at for Greek words. And then summarize the meaning. So that's what we have here for this word fellowship in Philemon. Okay, so there's an example. And then I give you space to do your text. So complete a word study on at least 3 significant words from your first assigned passage from Colossians. So again, if Brother Robert, is he working on his text, he's going to look up, so Colossians 1, 15 to 17, he's going to identify 3 words from that passage and do a word study on each word. And then he's going to identify 3 words from the next passage, chapter 1, 18 to 20, for him. You will do this for your assigned passage. All right? So if you can see, find your name here and just work on your passage. Okay? All right. So Brother Dooney, for example, Colossians 2, 8 to 12, and then Colossians 2, 13 to 15. So 3 words from each of those. All right. Hopefully that makes sense, everybody. So I've got here, do a word study on 3 words from your first passage. So word 1, 2, and 3, following the format, the steps here. And then the example I gave you shows how to do each step. And then do that for the first, second, third word. Then turn to the second assigned passage and do at least 3 words from that passage. Again, you can do more. There's no restriction on how many you want to do, but for the assignment, you need to do at least 3 and follow the format given here. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you do have any questions, as always, you can message me, email me, and ask. I'd be happy to help you. I won't pick your words for you from the text, but if you have a question on whether a word looks like a good one to use or not, again, I've given you some guidance there in how to identify a significant word. So just use that guidance, come up with the 3 words for each passage that you feel would be important to study. All right. Okay. Well, that's all I have for you for this assignment. I hope that makes sense. You can get some more detail in the syllabus if you want to look there for that. And again, when you complete your assignment, let's just remember here, you'll go to Canvas. You'll go to tmai.instructure.com. All right. And you'll have the login. And then you'll pick, you'll only have one class on your dashboard for now. And then you're going to go to assignments. Okay. On the left here. And this is what it's going to look like to you guys. And I'm going to go to assignment 1.17, which isn't due yet. It's due actually next week. So I'm going to go to assignment 1.17 and click on that guy. And again, start the assignment, but don't start it yet. First, you want to download. Remember this, right? You should be aware of it by now. Download the assignment first, then do the assignment. So if I download it, right, I'll have, here it is. Here's the assignment that I just showed you. So I'll download that assignment here. And then once I downloaded it, I do the assignment. Then when I'm done, then go to start assignment. Okay, because under start assignment, it's going to ask you to upload the file. So I'll choose the file and then I'll need to, okay, assignment, looking for here's assignment 1.17. And then I'll choose a file, then submit the assignment. Okay, boom. And we're done. Now, if I want to make changes, or I realize I made a mistake, or whatever the reason, you can just go back here and then notice where it says start assignment. It now says new attempt. So you can just go there and hit new attempt. Say, okay, I want to upload. I want to choose a file. I want to upload another file here. So I redid the assignment. Now I'm going to upload it again and then hit submit. Okay. And you can do that as often as you want. All right. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. And know that I'm praying for you guys to stay on top of the assignments. Keep working at it. A number of you are doing really well. Some of you are a little bit behind, so I would encourage you. There's still plenty of time. It's February 20 right now, so March, April. So we still have 2.5 months almost, a little over 2 months before we meet again. So there's still time. If you're behind, there's time to catch up. You're just going to have to be more diligent these next several weeks. So we've got about 8 or 9, 10 weeks left before we have our class together. So you're going to want to be ready because you're going to be preaching your sermon at that time. So you want to make sure get working on these assignments. And if you are behind, just focus on the written assignments first, and then you can go back and do the reading assignments. Okay? But I am looking forward to receiving those assignments. I believe I've graded just about all the assignments that have been turned in, at least up until a couple days ago. So if you haven't received a grade back for an assignment that you thought you turned in, make sure and check that you did in fact turn it in, because I've graded almost every assignment that's been turned in so far. Okay. All right, brothers. Well, wish you well. God bless you. And I'll continue to pray for your progress in the class, but also in ministry. If you have any prayer requests, please send them, or feel free to post them on our group chat, and just let all the brothers know if you have a particular prayer request that you would like to share with the rest of us. All right. So with that, God bless you, brothers, and look forward to seeing you in the near future. Again, we will have class at the regularly scheduled time next week on February, or I guess it would be March 1st. Okay. All right. Take care.